Female Hogan, it is built so that when you look up at the ceiling, you are in the actual, like a bird nest. The teaching about the Hogan among our people, the Ne. There are two types of Hogan, the male and the female. And so we have in the past shared one about the male Hogan. And we have had a lot of people inquire about the teachings about the female Hogan. And so we'll begin at the beginning. The early Ne, when they first came into the area here, which would be the greater southwest, it was called eventually the Netha, and that would be where our people were. And so many different groups of people came from all over the continent. Some came from the east, and some came from the south, some came from the west, and some came from the north. And many of these people had their own particular way of constructing their dwellings. But the Dene, the original Dene, the first four Dene, the Kipikia'ani, Todichini, not Jenny, and the Hashtishane would probably be some of the very first four groups or clans of the Dene that came into this area. And they also built their homes a certain way, and they generally used rocks and clay. And the Dene, when they first came into this area, they say that there were already various groups of people in various areas of the place that they had migrated to or come into. And this is some 2,000 years ago, or more than 2,000 years ago in some cases. But they attracted these other groups of people, and they themselves became Dene. And so there were, at one time, they say over at least 150 different groups of people that became Dene. And so they all had their particular way of constructing their dwellings. And the teaching of our people is that at some point when the holy people advised the Dene that they should abandon living in these rock structures that were built with rock and clay. And they were told that when the earth moves that they tend to cave in and would harm them and even take lives. And so they were told and instructed to watch the animals, the various animals and birds and insects, and observe how they constructed their homes. And so that's what the Dene did. The cribbing, or the roof of the female Hogan, is built in the same way that eagles and various birds build their nests. And they have it so that it's like a bowl. But here in the female Hogan, it is built so that when you look up at the ceiling, you are in the actual, like a bird nest, and where it is that it is domed overhead. If you ever had the opportunity to watch how birds construct their nests, is that they always put the bottom of the, whatever it is, the twig, or whatever material it is that they stick into the nest, and then they lay it in a clockwise direction. And then they smooth it all out in that way. And that's the way it is with the overhead roofing and cribbing of the female Hogan. The Dene Hogan, what we call Hogan, which is the extension of Mother Earth. These are not sticks that these dwellings are made of. They are made out of poles. Very long poles. Some of them are as long as 16 feet, and they weigh probably some more than 200 pounds. When they're wet, they're very heavy, and so after they dry out, they can sustain a lot of weight. And we use the juniper. Juniper is very good to have placed into the ground because it doesn't attract a lot of insects, and it lasts for quite a few years. But the subject of the Hogan, the female Hogan, is that the structure has been pretty much consistent as to the way that they were originally built, which would be that there would be 8 sides or 8 walls, and there would be 9 poles. 9 poles would be at the various corners. Now, in reality, it is that the Hogan has 8 poles or 8 points to every corner. That when you combine all of the corners, there are 8, but the entryway has 2 of them. So that makes an extra pole, so that adds up to 9 poles. And those 9 poles are symbolic of the 9 moon cycle that the mother carries her child before giving birth. And also the shape of the female Hogan is basically that it has a dome top. I've tried to make a small drawing just to kind of illustrate the circular design of the Hogan, and also the dome top. The dome top is very important because that is the physical shape of the mother before she gives birth to her child. And also at the top is the smoke hole, which is symbolic of the navel, or where the umbilical cord is attached to the mother and to the child. And so the Hogan is very much symbolic of the female form, and the teachings in that are associated with the female Hogan is all based on the understanding that the women have different responsibility and the men have different responsibilities, and that as far as taking care of their family and the beings that they bring into this world, into the third world. So these are the various brief illustration in that I have made. As I mentioned, the opening and doorway to the Hogans are always open to the east. And so I put down here the eastern direction, which is where the opening is, and then you have the south and the west and the north. And these are the 8 sides. But as I mentioned, we have 9 poles. So it is that there are 9 poles that hold up the roof of the structure. The Hogan has always been, the female Hogan has always been that it has consistently been 8-sided and also with a dome top. And the original Hogan had to be underground, and sometimes it would be 2 feet, maybe 3 feet underground. And that was the very first Hogan, and they called that Hogan, which means into the ground where the house or the Hogan sits. And the very first Hogan with the horizontal logs placed in the circle with the 8 sides, so they would have 8 poles that they would lay out in that circle, and they would be beveled at the end so that they would interlock. And so when they did that, and they laid only 2 courses of the logs was used to form the very basic design of the Hogan. The 2 courses of logs would be laid down, and as I mentioned, they would be interlocked at the corners, and they would take the dirt that was taken out of the inside of the Hogan and place it on the outside, so the pressure that would be created by the dirt from the outside would push the logs together, and so it would be very stable. And after they laid down the 2 courses of logs, they would then begin the cribbing. The cribbing is the way that the roof is laid out, where you have the logs that would be the ones that would be the roof over the top, and that's what causes or creates the dome shape of the roof area. The opening to the top, at the top of the structure, was not very large. Traditionally, they say that the dwellings that our people lived in, that when they were made out of rocks and clay, the entryway into the structure was at the roof, and so that entryway was also used as the smoke hole. But they referred to the area up at the overhead, the smoke hole, as chilate or chilaye. When you understand the word, chil is plant growth that is overhead, or where the plants grow overhead. And so that was the name of the smoke hole, chilate, chilaye. And the various evolution that the Hogan has gone through, there are many, and some of the structures, eventually when they acquired livestock, the Hogan, the one that they would call Tege Hogan, which would be the one that is dome all the way from the ground level up over the top, and it was just sloped enough so that the goats or the sheep could climb up on top of the Hogan. And so because when the animals went up on top, sometimes they would lay up there and a good number of them would cause additional weight to be on top of the Hogan, and there was always the dangers of breaking some of the poles and having a cave-in. And so that was considered very dangerous. And the way that they took care of that is that they took poles and still maintained the 8 sides, but they put the poles into the ground vertically, and then they would put the first course at the top of those poles to begin the 8-sided structure of the female Hogan, because the outside poles that would be placed into the ground in a vertical pattern, it made it difficult for the goats or the sheep to get up on top of the Hogan. And so that was one reason for the evolution of the Hogan, was the vertical walls, poles, and that to create the 8-sided Hogan. Now, there's another thing that happened, is that during Huelte, or when our people were being held prisoners of war for the 4 years, they observed that the structures that were built by the military out at Huelte, they had corners that interlocked, where they had the poles notched, and the corners were notched so that they interlocked at the corners. And so when they returned from the Huelte captivity, instead of putting the poles into the ground and having a vertical pole wall, they put in the poles so that they were horizontal and interlocked at the corners. And so that's how that came about. And they generally maintained the idea and the teachings of having 8 courses of poles or 12 courses of poles from the ground level to the roof level. And that's the way that they began to construct the female Hogan. And it still had the entryway to the east, and then it still had maintained the 8 sides and the main support poles of 9. And the cribbing, of course, is always very important. The cribbing, when it is done overhead, the poles are always set in a way that the bottom of the tree is on the left and the tip of the tree is on the right. So every pole in every female Hogan is set in that particular way overhead, where you have the bottom of the tree to the left and the tip of the tree to the right. And some of these poles are 16 feet long, and they are very large poles. Some of them weigh as much as 300 pounds, and when we put them into to create the roof, we have to lay other logs on top of it, and you can see from some of these pictures and that the way that the poles are set in. But all of them is what we call the continual growth direction, which is anosek. We always do everything in that particular way. Whenever you enter a dwelling of the Dene, when you enter, you're facing east. You always go to your left, and you make that entryway. You come around in the clockwise direction. After you've entered, you can move around inside the dwelling, but when you exit, you complete the clockwise direction as you exit the Hogan. And so that's true for the male Hogan and the female Hogan. So whenever you enter into Hogan of the Ne, remember always to go to your left and to go around in a clockwise direction. The other teachings of the Ne is that when the Hogan is constructed and completed, they always have a dedication ceremony. This is what they used to call it. You never occupy a Hogan without it having been dedicated to the reason for that structure. And it is that it would be a place that you would raise your family, that you would be able to feed them and to instruct them and to be able to have them there in safety. You would protect them. So the teachings are that it is dedicated to being a house or an extension of Mother Earth, a place of prayer, a place of safety and security, a place of instruction, and a place of where you would be able to be together as a family. And so the teachings of our people, when they dedicate this dwelling, it is actually that the holy people will be there with you. And so some of the things that they have is huneshkish, is the fire poker. That is very important, that you have a fire poker in your home. Tatanle is what our people used to call that. And then edasin, which is the stirring sticks. Now that's part of the teaching, is that you must always have a stirring stick in your home as a woman in your Hogan. There are 7 sticks to the stirring sticks. These are the 7 blessing way or beauty way ceremonies that the changing woman gave to the Dene. And so it is very important that we have the 7 sticks of the Edestin in the home, which is the representative and symbolic of the arrows and that you would use to fight off hunger. And the other teaching is that 8 sides is very important to understand. In the traditional teachings, our people were told you would have the 7 beauty way ceremony, but you would have that one extra ceremony that was brought to the Dene. And we explained that in the Yeviche presentation. So we had 8 ceremonies that were very much a part of the way that dwellings are built and the way that the dwellings are used to raise your families. And so those are the basic teachings of the Dene and the symbolism in that. There's a lot more symbolism involved in the female Hogan. But the basic things of the teaching of our people concerning the Hogan is all about the relationship as the Dene that we would have with the holy people. And the smoke hole, as I mentioned, is the navel. And that is the one about prayer. When you pray and you offer your prayer, you put the small pinch of corn pollen right here on the top of your head where your spiral is on top of your head, which is in a clockwise direction. And then you take a little bit of it and you put it on your tongue. And then you also sprinkle to the direction east the corn pollen, the yellow corn pollen path, which is to say that outside of this dwelling, there is a path. And I always have to maintain that path. And I'm offering this prayer from where the spiritual umbilical cord connects me as an individual Dene to the holy people, to the smoke hole. And I must always stay on this path, which is the yellow corn pollen path, is a path of prayer. You must always be prayerful when you step out the door of your Hogan and follow that yellow corn pollen path and never stray from that. And so those are the many teachings and symbolism and that associated with the teachings of the female Hogan. And those are the things that we are told.
Hey, thanks for watching our videos. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss one of our uploads. Also, head over to our website, NavajoTraditionalTeachings.com. Sign up for our email list. Ahead.